Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist. And today I want to talk to you about why binge eating isn't your fault. One of the things that breaks my heart is how much people blame themselves and shame themselves for having this problem. So I want to share with you 3 reasons why it's not your fault, in the hope that you can reduce that self-blame and that self-conflict. Because for as long as you're blaming yourself and saying to yourself, I'm just the problem, I'm broken in some way, you will stay stuck because you will keep it as a fight with yourself. You will continue to fight with this problem, and we know that doesn't work. So I want to share with you 3 reasons why it's not your fault. And plus I get to do that in my thumbnail again, which I haven't been able to do for a while. You know how you make all these promises to yourself about how you're going to do it differently tomorrow, and you mean it with every fiber in your body, and yet for some reason you don't seem to. This is because binge eating is a problem of primal dysregulation. We like to think that we are cognitive, rational beings who can just think our way through any problem. But we're animals. We have these physical bodies, we have these drives and these desires that are beyond our conscious control. So with something like binge eating, the appetite system, which is so powerful, has become dysregulated, has become extremely powerful, and has seemed to have taken a mind of its own. When the system becomes dysregulated, you will think about food constantly. You will feel out of control when you eat. You will struggle to feel satisfied, and you will compulsively eat more than you feel physically comfortable consuming. This one is so important to understand because what's happening is your appetite centers are in your lower brain. They're in your limbic brain down here. And your executive functioning, your thinking brain, if you like, which we tend to think is who we are, is up here in our prefrontal cortex. When the lower brain becomes overactive, they can see this on brain scans. The blood flow moves away from your prefrontal cortex towards the limbic brain. It's like your thoughts are actually being starved of oxygen. This is why it can feel like it's not even you making the decision to eat. It can feel like someone's just switched off a light or you're on autopilot. That's because your lower brain has taken over. And until that part calms down, your thinking will not come back online. That part often comes down once the food's gone, once you've already binged. Then your thinking brain comes back on and you use your thinking brain to beat yourself up. Sometimes people see recovery as ways to somehow dominate the lower brain. We can't. It's extremely powerful. And as I said, once it's highly activated, it's like you're not even there anymore. So actually, recovery means learning how to calm down the limbic brain. And in many of my other videos, when I'm talking about steps to recovery, these are the kinds of things that will help you do that. One thing we know that works really well at calming down the limbic brain is self-compassion. Because self-compassion calms down emotional reactivity. And guess what? Our emotions are down here in our limbic brain as well. That's why we often just call ourselves emotional eaters. So big emotions that make the limbic brain very, very active. The catastrophization, the big feelings that seem to just hijack thinking, those can also trigger appetite, as can, for most people, restriction, dieting, not eating enough, or even planning to diet. Which brings me on to the second one, that you did not bring this problem on yourself. If you're somebody who recognizes that dieting, restricting, trying to control food was what initially triggered your binge eating, it can be easy to go to a place of beating yourself up and thinking, well, I clearly brought this on myself. If you dieted, restricted, or tried to control food, of course you did. The message out there is that's what we're supposed to be doing. And the message out there is it's perfectly safe to do that. And for some people, it really isn't. For some people, that over-controlling of food, I hope this doesn't sound hyperbolic to say it's dangerous because it can have such a backlash by way of binging. So if you dieted or if you were still trying to control food, that is not your fault. That is social conditioning that tells you that this is what you need to do. It's also your experience of feeling so out of control with food that you're like, I just have to figure out how to be in control, because it's so frightening to be at the other end of the spectrum. The third way I hear people blame themselves is they say, I use food to cope. I use food because I can't cope with my emotions or because I can't cope with life. And then people judge themselves because we feel like we should be able to cope, and that if we can't cope, that somehow means that we are weaker than everybody else, or we're a failure because we can't seem to thrive in the way that other people seem to be doing that. Well, I want to offer you this. Babies are born into the world and they cannot cope. Your baby gets born into the world. If they are not taken care of, they will not survive. So we learn how to cope by our caregivers. That's how we figure out how to cope in this world. So if you are somebody who sees yourself as over emotional, not being able to handle your emotions, the question is, what was the modeling at home, and how did your caregivers teach you to do that? The amount of times I'll hear people saying, I'm a terrible communicator, I'm awful at this, I'm awful at that. And I'll say, well, who taught you how to do that? And of course, usually it's, well, no one actually taught me, and this is what I saw. It's why in therapy we're very interested in what happens to you growing up, and not even just what happens to you, but how you experienced what happens to you, because that's the crucial part. Through adult rationalization, you could look back and go, well, I know that my parents, they were stressed, my mum was depressed, my dad was anxious, and that's why they weren't available for me. When you were a kid, you didn't know that. And I'll bet you anything, when you were a kid, you blamed yourself for their inability to be able to respond to you. Because if a kid is having a big emotion and gets a negative response, no response, they're going to turn it inwards and think, I was wrong for having that feeling. And then we become scared of our feelings and we do whatever we can to get them to go away. And we know food can work quite well at soothing feelings, and it's available, and it's socially acceptable, and it doesn't harm anybody else. So no wonder food becomes a way to cope. People think if they say that it's not their fault, that somehow they're letting themselves off the hook. I don't know, let's say you went on holiday and you came back and your home had been ransacked by burglars. That is not your fault that you have come home to this, that your house was burgled. But it is going to be your job to sort it out. There's going to be mess to clear up. You're going to need to call insurance companies. There's going to be all these different things to figure out to get things back in order, as well as working through your feelings about it, having someone come in and burgle your house. Likewise with binge eating, this is not your fault. It is going to be your job to sort out the mess though, and figure out what you need to do in order to get life back to a place of balance again. Or maybe not even again. This problem may go back as far as you can even remember. I know it can feel like there's just so much chaos that you don't know where to begin, which is exactly why I create the content that I do. So there's plenty more videos on my channel. You also might want to check out my podcast, Life After Diets, where we go into a lot of the things I talk about on the channel in greater depth, because it's just longer form content. And I hope this was useful. Be kind to yourself. It's really, really not your fault. And I hope I hope you can really hear that. Take a moment to sit with that, because it's true. And if I could get anybody to realize anything at the beginning of their recovery, it's that. It's not your fault. Anyway, thank you for listening. Take care. See you on the next video.